Welcome, everybody, to the Unraveler Show. Tonight, I am so excited to have Dr. Price with me here on this show. We are going to have a great time tonight. We're going to talk about some things that are different, some things that are unique, and some things that are familiar. And it's going to be a great opportunity for you to hear some of the wonderful thoughts that come from that great mind of Dr. Price. He is a New Testament scholar, a mythicist, an author, a podcaster, and a former Baptist minister. Now, Dr. Price, I'm just going to have to say, I have one up on you. When I was a minister, I had already advanced beyond the Baptist. You know what I'm saying? Like I went through Presbyterian. I was a full preterist. So my ministry was clearly better than yours. But all kidding aside, tonight we're going to talk about mythicism, satire, apologetics, comic books, the whole 9 yards. We're going to have a great time. But Dr. Price, he's been called the bard of biblical blasphemy, the mythbuster of messiahdom, and the only man who can quote both Paul and Paul Bunyan in the same breath. Welcome, Dr. Price.
Oh, thanks very much. It's a privilege and a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here and gracing us with your presence tonight. So, Bob, I'm going to start out right out the gate, just clarifying some things before we get into the fun stuff. There's been a lot of controversy going on with you, especially dealing with Derek Lambert on MythVision. And I just want to take an opportunity to clear the air, because having you on my show is also theoretically controversial, because I've had people on my show that oppose your views. And this could potentially become problematic unless we make some clear statements here. First one I want to say is each platform has its purpose. I am not here to debate or defend politics with you. That serves its purpose on a different platform. I am not a politician, and nor do I intend to try to be. So what we are discussing here tonight is theology, is bibliology, is different views of whether or not Christ existed, those kinds of things. I have no interest in debating you over politics. And I'm fine with where you are in your journey, because let's face it, all of us have been in different places in our journey, and some of us in the same places you have been at certain times in our life. That doesn't mean you're wrong or right. It just means we're all on a journey. And I may have gone to a place you haven't in certain realms like politics, but that doesn't mean I'm always right. How can I know? I do the best that I can with the information I have, and so do you. And so it would be wrong for me to sit here and be like, well, that Bob, he's just not he's a Trumper, shame on him, or whatever you are. It's not fair to do that, because every one of us has journeyed through that, especially if we came out of Christianity.
Hmm.
So it's just part of the journey, and everybody has different perspectives on why they think what they think in certain spheres. So I want to give you an opportunity to respond to that and make your comments on that as well, because I want to be able to incorporate you and people who oppose your other views in the same show, theoretically, and have fun together, because we don't have to fight over
Yeah.
useless things.
Hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I agree completely. Yeah, that's true.
Awesome. Okay, great. So that's clear. Now, I want to ask you one other question,
Hmm.
and this is going to be a very poignant one, because I want to clear the air with this too, so that listeners or viewers can actually hear from the horse's mouth, so to speak, where you stand on this issue. Because there has been a lot of comments that I have seen and heard going around, maybe based on comments you've made in the past, that you are a racist.
Hmm.
Now, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, so that the viewers can hear from you whether or not you are a racist.
Yeah, one really amazes me because I have been clearly against that for as long as I can remember, even when I was a kid in Mississippi, where I was born. And one odd thing that may be responsible for some of it, I don't know. Uh, a couple of years ago, my older brother told me something that I hadn't been told closer to the events, namely that two of my uncles, one on each side of the family, had been killed because of their opposing the Ku Klux Klan. One was an FBI man who was involved in fighting the Klan in Mississippi, and they were beginning to threaten his family. And he figured that the only way to prevent that was for him to kill himself, which he did. He had guests over for dinner and at one point excused himself, be right back, went upstairs and bang! Uh, and this was a total shock. Well, as far as I knew, I didn't know what led up to this. I thought, why did he do it at all, much less in such circumstances? Only decades later did I find out what was at stake. Well, the other one on my mother's side of the family, I was always told that he was killed by a drunk driver, but no, not exactly. He had earned the ire of the KKK, and some Klansmen ran him off the road, and he died in the ensuing car accident. So the same day, I learned that my two late uncles were killed because of their opposition to the Klan. Well, I mentioned this on Facebook and said, naturally, I remain upset at their deaths, but I have to say I'm very proud of the stand they took and that they gave their lives in this struggle against racism. Well, shortly thereafter, I began hearing that some people were circulating the misapprehension, I don't know where they got it, that I had two uncles who were members of the Klan. Uh, Boy, that tells you about oral tradition and its accuracy. Uh, Also, things were going on with some of the leaders of things like Black Lives Matter and people like Al Sharpton and so on. And I did a column, one of my Zarathustra Speaks columns called Black Lives Matter. And I said, what's going on here is that African Americans are being betrayed by uh, people that are posing as their friends but exploiting them for money. And this was before it turned out that Black Lives Matter was simply a fundraising scheme, and that the leaders who took in all that money used it all to buy mansions and so on, something I never would have guessed even, and certainly never alleged. Well, people began to say, oh, that Price, he's a racist. And there was nothing I could say to set him straight. And I've never been able to fathom that. I've always denied it. And at the same time, though, I was being vilified for not being politically correct on a number of issues. For example, I once, well, more than once said, I have always told my daughters that they are at least the equal of any man. I've always tried to promote women in the ministry, things like that. I said, but I realize I don't dare claim the tag feminist because those who think they own the copyright on it believe that you've got to be a member of the Democratic Party and be in favor of abortion. Well, I'm not. So that's not good enough. I merely think women are equal to, if not superior to men, and probably the latter, like Ashley Montague argued. So I remain mystified, but apparently they just tossed me into the same derangement syndrome that if you weren't PC, you were to be shunned. And so I would have opportunities to explain that on people's podcasts. Never seemed to make any difference, but ultimately, I really don't care what anybody thinks. I espouse other views, like we're going to talk about with Jesus and mythicism, where I understand there's a reason that people are alarmed by that, and I try not to antagonize them because I don't want to be sadistic, but I seek out people with views and perspectives alien to my own so that I can understand what they think better. And I try to be open to convincement. And I have changed my mind on big things because of that approach more than once. So I'm not a racist or any other kind of ist, but to me, it's a boring, dead issue. If there are people that hate me without cause, well, maybe it's their hobby. I don't, it doesn't really touch me what they think.
All right. Well, so it is. And I appreciate you making it explicitly clear. So that should settle it. Hopefully, everybody sees this and hears from you. That is the word from the horse's mouth. So if you still think Dr. Robert M. Price is a racist, then you are literally just making that up. So thank you very much for clarifying that. Now, shall we get on to the fun stuff? By the way, if you are watching, the comments are available and open for you to make. We would love to hear from you throughout the show, especially if you have questions. I will have opportunity throughout to ask Dr. Price your questions if you would like to keep it, on the topic or whatever. But let's go ahead and do that. It'll be a lot of fun. So, Bob, right out the gate, I want to ask you, just so people can get to know you better and I can get to know you better. What was the moment when your confidence in Christianity began to crack?
I'd say it was back in 1977 when I was at Gordon Conwell Seminary in Massachusetts. And I had for a few months started to question the whole evangelical Christian thing. And of course, Gordon Conwell was a stronghold for that sort of thing. When I was there, I was just pursuing a Master of Theological Studies degree centering on New Testament. And that alone, by itself would have been enough, because the more you get into New Testament scholarship and read various perspectives, you realize that what apologists say in defense of it is based on, no doubt unwitting but ignorant misinformation about the great biblical critics like F.C. Bauer and Rudolf Bultmann and so forth. And I found, reading their side of it, that it made more sense of the text. And one thing that went so deeply into me from having been a Bible believing Christian was the fascination with the Bible and the urgency to understand it better. And then when you're like that and you think you do understand it better and that it does not back up the orthodox traditional view, well, you're at a crossroads. And I figured I got to remain intellectually honest about this, come what may. And then various other things in the stance of evangelicals, like non-believers are going to hell, and even though God is a loving God, He's sentencing people to eternal torture, and this, that, and the other thing. I thought this just doesn't hold together. The deeper, and this was at the beginning of my study at Drew University in a doctoral program in systematic theology, which I finished and got my first PhD. And then a dozen years later, while I was serving as a pastor of Harry Emerson Fosdick's old church, oddly enough, First Baptist of Montclair, I went back to Drew, it wasn't far away, and started another doctoral program in New Testament, which I finished 3 years later. Immensely fascinating. Well, I was serving as a pastor, but I didn't preach what people ought to think and believe. Rather, I preached on usually on some Bible passage or the equivalent, like from the Gospel of Thomas. And what I would do is to choose a topic or a question raised there and then meditate on that. I didn't just cheerlead for the Bible or for traditional doctrine. And most of my congregants had their own checkered history of belief and were kind of open to that. So that was a lot of fun, but it finally evaporated because of financial difficulties with the church. We couldn't pay the bills, and so I got sick of the politics that emerged, the church, the institutional politics, and left. And oh, let's see, I'm leaving out some stuff. This is tedious enough, but I it was because I loved the Bible and the questions of theology and the writings of theologians that I found that, well, like in the title of a book I did about this a couple of years ago, that it wasn't the gospel truth, it was merely Christianity. Of course, it was a takeoff on C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity. And I went through and said, I don't think Christianity is evil or anything like that, but I don't think it can really live up to its credentials that it claims. And many of us feel that way, not because we hate it, but because it just doesn't seem reasonable. C.S. Lewis said, I'm not asking anybody to accept the Christian faith if his best reason is against it. I said, well, fair enough. And for many of us, it's come to that point. It does not seem to commend itself. But I've never stopped loving Christianity and all the religions. Just published a book called Houses of the Holy, surveying a dozen religions and their strengths and what's so fascinating about them. And so, but that's what I graduated into. One last thing about this. Max Shaler, a Protestant sociologist and philosopher, said that there's a difference between the apostate and the convert. The apostate is someone who decides he does not believe what he was coached to believe and then switches teams and begins to take revenge on it and to try to destroy it. Whereas the convert says, you know, I can't buy this anymore. Let me find something else that I can get on the bandwagon of. A positive turn, not a negative one. And after an initial period of being pretty furious at how I felt I had been misled, I said, look, I got to reconcile the parts of myself. I got to remember the good that evangelical Christianity did for me. I can't write off the whole thing. But I do have to broaden my horizons and keep looking for more of the truth. So I've tried to maintain that balance and that wide open appreciation ever since.
That's really fascinating. So what would your boy, I have so many questions based on everything you just said. Let me start with this one. This is kind of a fun question. Then, what would your 25-year-old self say to you today?
Um, well, that was probably after I had rounded the corner, but probably what some friends of mine did who did not just repudiate me at the time, as some did. Um, Probably he would say, "Have you really given this a fair chance? What about this? What about that?" And by that time, I think I would have still been prepared to say, "No, no, I've thought of that. I just don't think you can really defend this. But it's a good thing, not a bad one. More power to you." And because that's, I mean, I have some of my best friends, I guess my best friends are evangelical Christians today. And we have, oh, immensely fun theological conversations over pizza. I don't want to disabuse them of their faith. I don't hide what I think, but these people are broad-minded enough to sort of take my stance, to want to hear more. And so I guess I would have made friends with my younger self and said, well, what say you and I keep learning together?
Yes. Well, one thing I have observed about you, as I've heard you dialogue with people through the years, you're kind, you're gentle, you're loving, you're forgiving. It's amazing that people have any negative perspectives about you at all. As we open the show, like I'm just like I don't get it, I don't see it. So it's sad to me, and I think because people, it's easy to stand at a distance and make judgments when you don't actually know a person.
Mm.
Um, but even then, without knowing you, I still, was able to make some pretty logical deductions about you just based upon how you treat people, even in debates. But that being said, so speaking of debates and speaking of everything we've said so far, you've debated a lot of apologists, obviously, and you've discussed things with them, and you've been known to say that they are doing Sunday school in disguise. Has there ever been an apologist or an argument that has made you pause for a second?
I'd have to say no. I know that sounds like, well, yeah, I'm just an ideologue. I won't give them the time of day. I won't seriously think of what they say. But almost, well, in every case I can think of, the weakness or contradictions in things they've said had already been obvious to me for a long time, especially because I may, at an earlier point, have thought the same thing and seen through it. But I've become good friends with a number of people I have debated, like Bob Siegel, who's an evangelical and a political conservative and has a couple of radio shows out in San Diego. When I flew out there to debate him, we went out for pizza as soon as I got there and found out we were both Star Trek nerds and so forth. And we became good friends. And it just didn't get in the way. Why should it? And that same is true with others. I remember when I debated Michael Green, whose work I knew for years already as a sort of famous English apologist. I had respect for this man, and that didn't change. And so I thought it was an honor to be on the platform with this guy, and said so. I was sincere. Once Edwin Yamauchi appeared in the audience to challenge something I said. I wasn't debating him, but I was surprised to see him. And I said, "Wow, it is an honor to meet you, sir." And he admitted he was taken aback, but I don't see these people as enemies. One or two of them I did feel were sort of used car salesmen, but even there, so what? It's no skin off my nose. But you can. I often point out on the Bible Geek, if I criticize some apologist's argument on something, I will be careful to say, now, this person is a real scholar and very erudite, and his argument is not stupid. Let me get that straight, but I'm not convinced by it, and here's why. if you're not willing to be a gentleman about it, what are you bothering for? It has to be an intelligent exchange, and that means it's got to be good humored, and it always is. I find it's very enjoyable.
Right, right. Well, that's great, and I find the same when I interact, and I interact with several Christians, and I've done it on my channel, and not just one debate, but we do shows, and they're good friends of mine. I agree with you, and there's no reason for it to be antagonistic. I mean, it is, and even sometimes the debate gets heated, but we're still friends afterwards, and it's
Mm-hmm.
fine. I mean, it's just you have to understand the nature of debate, and that's just the way it works sometimes.
Right.
Uh, so that's that. But all right, so obviously, you've left Christianity. You were a pastor at one point. You've debated apologists. In your and so let's get in a little bit into mythicism and your view there. In your book, Deconstructing Jesus, you say the plurality of Jesuses in early Christianity reflects the fact that there never was a single historical founder. That is fascinating. Um, if you could elaborate a little on that and then answer this question: if there was no historical Jesus, what do you think created the spark that led to early Christianity?
Well, I'm thinking that it was just the latest stage of evolution in a very ancient um, mythic approach to religion that goes all the way back to Baal, Attis, Tammuz, Marduk, and so forth, with the same thing that eventually became Gnosticism, a belief based on the change of seasons and agriculture and the death and rebirth of vegetation, all tied in with the annual renewal of the king's mandate from heaven, in which the king underwent a ritual mimicking the creation myth, in which Yahweh or Marduk or Baal, etc., uh, became king of the gods by destroying a threatening chaos dragon that the pantheon of gods were too old and weak to deal with. And he said, "If I will defeat this danger, if you will make me the new king." Sure, anything you say. And Marduk, etc., a thunder god and warrior god, took on Tiamat, Leviathan, whatever you wanted to call it, and defeated it and made the world from its carcass and became king of the gods. This is actually mentioned in Psalm 89 and Psalm 74, in Job and Isaiah. And the monster Leviathan, the seven-headed dragon, reappears in Revelation, where the whole thing kind of happens all over again. Well, the king underwent a symbolic death and resurrection because he symbolized the people and the forces of nature, which they believed had run down and run out of gas because of the sins of the people. So he was the sin bearer. He symbolically died, but then came back to life and was given his crown back and enthroned and all of that. So he was a suffering redeemer and a God on earth. Well, this was especially prevalent in the Middle East and so on, but there are parallels all over the place. And eventually, like Osiris in Egypt was a major example of this, and he was certainly known in biblical culture. Joseph was already a kind of Judaized version of Osiris, in my opinion, and so that Christianity was just yet another stage of evolution as the culture developed and the settings did. So there needn't have been an individual who started this. It was sort of like when in India, the Vedic deity Rudra, who was a god of the forces of nature, eventually became Shiva, which means the auspicious one. Well, maybe something like that happened. A savior like Osiris was given the name by Jewish worshippers, Yehoshua, Yahweh is salvation. And he was depicted as a dying and rising God. And there's several elements of the Passion narrative that are already precedented in unthinkably ancient texts about Marduk in Babylon, and so much of it is like that. I don't think it's coincidence. So it seems, was there a historical Osiris? Well, Plutarch thought so. Was there a historical Hercules? Herodotus thought so. We don't think so anymore. And I tend to think that's more likely what happened. Now, there could have been a Jesus, a rabbi, a prophet, something like that, to whom this stuff was attached. But as I like to say, there might have been a historical Jesus, but there isn't anymore. There's no recoverable individual like Joseph Smith or whatever that you can point to, and especially since looking at the Gospels, there's nothing historical about this character. He's not woven in with the events of the time like Caesar Augustus was, though other things, some of these myths were applied to him, but he is inextricably bound to the history of the times and all manner of records. Jesus is not. Even the places where it seems that he is, being connected with Pilate and Caiaphas and Herod the Great, before anybody was even thinking of mythicism, scholars are saying, these stories don't quite pass muster. Would Pilate have been afraid of a mob and been reluctant to squash Jesus as like a bug? Would Caiaphas have had a kangaroo court on Passover Eve? Not likely. The thing where Herod the Great kills all the babies to get him. That's just like Josephus's rewrite of the Nativity of Moses, with Pharaoh killing all the kids. Whereas Josephus, the historian, who, though he details the crimes of Herod, doesn't ever mention that. So it seems like it's all a bunch of miracles and a bunch of sayings that are paralleled among the rabbis and the current philosophers and so on. So there is no real evidence for Jesus, in my opinion, and no need for one to explain what came about. Now, I don't think it would be better if there were no Jesus. And there may have been, unless somebody has a time machine in their garage we can borrow. It's impossible to know, or barring some amazing discovery, like a contemporary letter that mentions Jesus in passing. In fact, that would be enough to convince me that there was such a person, but so far, nothing. And so I think that maybe there was a Jesus. I'm not opposed to the idea, but I just don't. It's a probabilistic, tentative argument, as all historical judgments must be. So, was there probably a Jesus? I think not. It's just the hypothesis that makes most sense to of the evidence to me. I do not promote it as a dogma.
That's very clear, and I appreciate that. So it seems like there are several different camps here. There's the Bart Ehrman camp. Jesus definitely was a historical figure, but he was made out to be a legend. There's the mythologists that will say Jesus definitely did not exist without exception. They know somehow, don't know how.
Like Richard Carrier, who says that, for instance.
Okay, so there you go. And then you have your view where you're you're in the mythology camp, but not so dogmatic that says, hey, I can go either way. I see no reason to go this way. This seems the more logical approach. And then there's my camp, which is more on the other side, not quite of the Bart Ehrman camp, but saying, I mean, I have no problem with Jesus existing. That's fine with me. It has no bearing whatsoever on the fact that he still would be legendized and everything in the Bible is not truth. It's just it's a fictional mythology. But if it turned out he didn't exist, it has no bearing on my view. I mean, I don't think it does anything one way or the other for the legendary version of Jesus. So the one thing that it seems like all four of those views, from the extremes to the centers, that all of us can probably come out on top and agreeing on is, whichever view you have, it's a legend. That's the one thing that all, regardless of whether he existed or didn't existed, what we're reading is a mythology of a legend, somebody that was created to be something greater than he actually is. The writers mined the Old Testament to create fulfillments in the New, and brought about all these, fulfillments of types and shadows, and made Jesus out to be God. That we all know is a legend. None of us think that he was born of a virgin, died and rose from the dead. Well, maybe died, but not rose from the dead. Didn't walk on water, walk through walls, all those sorts of things. So, my question then is, in your opinion, what is the level of importance that you can kind of bring from all of these perspectives of whether or not Jesus actually did exist? Because clearly Christianity is a thing. It's an actual religion based upon this idea of a guy named Jesus. There's no question about it, and it's permeated our culture completely. So how important is it that there was an actual person named Jesus, or wasn't, and how did it bring about all this effect that we have today? And I guess I'm just going to leave it there. Just touch on that before I go any further.
Well, I think that the existence of the Jesus character as presented in the Gospels merits the importance that faith in Jesus has gained. Any way you cut it, the character says what he says and is presented as a like a paragon of self-giving dedication to ideals and all that. And when he says, anyone who would be my disciple, let him take up his cross and follow me. If there was a Jesus, I don't think he would have said that, because he's said to be speaking to a crowd who couldn't possibly understand what he was talking about at that stage of the game. But the point is, as a reader, I find that challenge confronts me, as it were, as it would if it were admittedly a novel. Like Albert Schweitzer, for instance, he did believe there was a Jesus for sure, but he knew that a lot of the Gospels were unhistorical and so forth, and it was a tough nut to crack to get back to the historical Jesus. But look at what the guy, he had 4 earned doctorates. He was extremely intelligent and a humanitarian. And he was the toast of the town in Europe for about half his life. And then he took stock of things and said, well, I've had more than my share of the good life so far. I owe it to Jesus to heed his call to discipleship in the second half of my life. So he gets accepted by a podunk mission board who was suspicious of his theology but accepted him, and he went to French Equatorial Africa, and in the middle of the jungle managed to set up a hospital with modern medicine, which they had never had before, and it was a grueling hell. And he did it because of the summons of Jesus, like he says in The Quest of the Historical Jesus. He comes to us as one unknown. And as he did with the disciples on the shore of Galilee, we hear his voice saying, follow thou me. And we take up the work he has for us to do. That remains just as profound, whether or not there actually was this guy, and whether or not doing your duty to humanity is going to give you a ticket to heaven one day. That has nothing to do with it. In fact, if that's your motivation, you're not taking the Jesus character seriously. It's like you're what is it about the losing your soul by trying to save it.
Right.
It's enlightened self-interest. That's not the Jesus way. It's what more like Kant, the unconditional imperative. It seems to me that's why it remains important. Now, a lot of people will never see it that way because of the way they've been taught the Gospels and the fear they've been taught that if you don't believe this, you're in for eternal torture. A crazy idea, but it'll get you scared if you believe it. And because they do, most people cannot take what Schweitzer said seriously. But if it weren't because of that catechism of hysterical fear, maybe they would. So I think Jesus would still be a powerful voice, fictional or not.
Right. So, would it have any um, different effect on you as an individual if it turned out to be proven that Jesus was a historical character?
I don't think so because of what you just said, that everything we have about him is so thoroughly soaked with legend that what would it matter? Is I like to say in response to what Bart says sometimes, he takes the approach that it was as if somebody believed that Superman really existed, but they admitted it's a little hard to believe somebody could leap tall buildings in a single bound and bounce bullets off his chest. No, that must be an accretion of legend. Let's see if we can strip that away and get back to the actual historical Superman. And when you're done, the historical Superman turns out just to be Clark Kent, a reporter, a mild-mannered reporter for a great metropolitan newspaper, as the introduction of the TV showed. And I find that implausible. If that was the historical Jesus, just some rabbi, who could bear the weight of the tonnage of the Christian religion? How would you go from that to the Council of Nicaea and all of that? So either he was this miraculous son of God or he was a mythical character, which are the same kind of, it's sort of two ways of saying the same thing. If Hercules was just Arnold Schwarzenegger, what's why are there Hercules legends? Or as what William Jennings Bryan said before the Scopes monkey trial, if St. George had killed a dragonfly instead of a dragon, who would remember him?
Right on. All right. So we have probably viewers who are coming in from different camps. We have the four, on the spectrum that I talked about. Um, what would you say? Number one, why is this important? And number two, based on its importance, what is the strongest presentation you can make in a succinct period of time here using just the best solid arguments that you have for Jesus being a myth? Can you answer those two questions?
Well, yeah, I think the um, importance of getting to this conclusion is, as Kant said, dare to know. Now, I take a kind of formally Gnostic approach to this. Most people will never be able to see the value in it as I do because of what got me to this. And I have no motive to upset their apple cart. I only debate apologists because I think they're snake oil salesmen, even if they don't know it. They're promoting an ignorant view. And as a New Testament scholar, I feel like I can't just let that pass if I have the opportunity to challenge it. The truth matters more than anything else. But I'm not like evangelistic atheists who feel it's my mission to disabuse the yokels of their false beliefs. And as to why I am so convinced of what I am is that for one thing, virtually every gospel story can be persuasively demonstrated to have been a rewrite of an Old Testament story of Elijah, Elisha, Moses, Joshua, David, and one or two others. And that's been done by many scholars. They'll put them side by side. I have a long demonstration of this in my book, The Christ Myth Theory and Its Problems. I think now, what's the likelihood of that being the case if you really had a historical biography of this man? So that's problematical. I don't argue in a circle and say, well, of course, a guy couldn't rise from the dead or do miracles, because we know that that can't happen. That's what apologists always charge people like me with believing, that it's circular. I'm begging the question. But I reply, no, I am not. I'm simply using the historical principle of analogy, that since you can only make probabilistic judgments, what's the criterion of plausibility? Is there a known analogy in contemporary experience to what is recorded here? And I always like the silly analogy of a guy coming home after a hard day's work, clicking on the TV set without even knowing what channel it's been left on. And the first thing he sees is a giant reptile stomping on skyscrapers. What does he think? Oh, I seem to have gotten CNN or the news channel. No, that doesn't even occur to him. He doesn't know for a fact that such a being does not exist, but he does know that there's plenty of Toho Studios movies with scenes like this. So what is this most probable? Well, it's not a news flash. It's a cheap kaiju movie. He doesn't know it for sure, but what are the chances? Well, given that, it's irresponsible to say, despite that, I know by faith that Jesus really rose from the dead. What do you mean? How does faith tell you anything? Are you like reading the Akashic records or something? I mean, that's just the will to believe. So I think you're without excuse. There's no real defense against these factors. And to be responsible intellectually, you got to say, well, I guess it's most likely a myth. But myths aren't bad. What does this myth challenge me to do or to be? That, to me, is the question of whether there was a Jesus or not. So that's the way I always put it. It's not like, oh, it's bunk. I mean, there are things that are bunk, but this isn't one of them.
So, would you say predominantly that your view would be that the myths we know throughout history have been based on fictional characters then? Or would you, so you would hold that consistently, like Jesus is the same as all of them? You don't actually think people existed that myths were created out of? They were made up.
It's possible. Like I was kid at Euhamerism, which that's called after the guy that cooked it up long ago, that people who were celebrities and heroes at the time, once they pass away, people trade stories. Like, remember when General Hercules defeated all those people? What a guy. Too bad we don't have more like him. Well, eventually that becomes Hercules as a son of Zeus who has superhuman powers and so on. That could have happened. Or Asclepius, the healing god. Couldn't he have been based on a very successful physician? Yeah, sure he could have. But as time goes by, they glorify him more and more. He becomes Marcus Welby at first, and then Asclepius. And Apollo, maybe he was just a guy that ran a tanning salon, but now we make him into a sun god. That no doubt has occurred. But the problem is the same with Jesus. If there was a historical core, it's irrecoverable, and you don't need it to explain what happened.
Okay. So in about 3 or 4 minutes ago, you had mentioned, maybe a little longer, you mentioned atheists, particularly, and I've heard you talk about new atheists and some of your struggles with the approach. For those of us who are watching, to make sure that we are cautious in our approach as we dialogue with Christians and especially apologists, what advice do you have to, especially the new atheists, to make sure that we're not crossing a line and we're being cautious?
Well, for one thing, they remain oblivious somehow of the effect of what they're doing. I sometimes think they get together and say, I don't think the general public hates us quite enough. Anybody got any ideas for stuff we could do that would really make them despise us? And because the stuff they do with this scorched earth policy, and let's get that cross taken down from the military cemetery. Why? Let's devote our lives to get "In God We Trust" off the coins. Well, I don't care what's on the coins. I can have a picture of Alfred E. Newman and say, "What, me worry?" I don't care. Why do they? I mean, this is like, what does it say in Matthew 23? You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. And then when they start creating atheism plus, well, we atheists are the smartest people. And at one point, they were crusading to rename themselves the Brights. How obliviously conceited and stupid can you be? I want nothing to do with that. Well, they figure they got to show everybody else how stupid they are to believe. They must realize that it's not going to be that easy. That people don't believe in this because of rational arguments to begin with. That they know, but by the same token, you're not going to be able to get them out of it by rational arguments. Why just not leave them alone? And that there again, I'm sort of a Gnostic. They're doing the best they can and believing what they do. They're motivated to be better people. Let them do it. Well, is it better that they not believe in God? Why? If somebody believes in Santa Claus, I don't find it convincing, but it's certainly, what do they say in Miracle on 34th Street? It's a delusion for good. What the heck? It's not like they're jihadis or something. So I think, plus atheists are too arrogant. They're too quick to think they got the universe all wrapped up. The older I get, the less, and I just turned 71, the less I can take for granted. Just things like the magnitude of the universe, the fact that there are these other planets unthinkable distances away from us, and that our star is a fly speck in a galaxy of unreachable stars, and that there are galactic clusters that between which oceans of infinity yawn, and so on and so on. You think you got that wrapped up? I mean, we don't even know what quasars are. Or stuff like something is taken for granted as human reproduction, any mammalian type reproduction. I mean, if you didn't know this and you were a kid and somebody said, well, let me tell you about the birds and the bees. And yes, you came out of the belly of your mother and then grew up to be the same size as her. You gotta be kidding me. The stork sounds more plausible than that. How could this happen? And this is where people begin to say, oh, well, there was an intelligent designer. I can understand the temptation of that, but I know that if you try to choke off the explanation with something like that, that's all you're doing, because who designed the designer? There's just no answer. And so I feel like the psalmist says, I am a worm and no man. Such knowledge is too high for me. I cannot grasp it. That's the humility, like how Shakespeare says, how like a god humans are, and yet how like a worm or an insect. To me, atheism, like fundamentalism, is just a grossly premature choking off of a question we can never answer.
So I think one of the reasons you're seeing what you're seeing is I feel like atheists also, just like it seems all Christians that I talk to, don't understand what atheism is and isn't. It is not a worldview. It is not a statement of belief. It is not a dictation of what is true. It is simply a rejection of the notion that a God exists because there is no evidence to support that.
Mm-hmm.
That's simply atheism. It's nothing more than that. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, atheists are getting thrown either intentionally or by unintentionally, because people are just misconceiving it or misconstruing it. But it's almost like there is this idea that atheists also have a community, a worldview, just like Christianity does, and we're trying to make people think what we think. And quite literally, that is not atheism. It just isn't. And we really need to clarify that completely, because as a humanist, I might have certain worldviews and agree with certain people and have different perspectives. As a scientist, you might have those worldviews and those perspectives. As a moralist, as a hedonist, as you name it, on and on and on, all the different worldviews. But as an atheist, I literally have no other connection to you or anybody else that's an atheist whatsoever, besides one fact. I have no reason to believe God exists. That's it. That should end. That's the beginning and end of atheism. And it should be. If that's where atheism is, and that's all that it is, then it shouldn't be causing such tension and problems and such antagonism, because all we need to do is demand that those who proclaim a God exists demonstrate that he does. And if you can't, all we're saying is, then why are you believing? Why do you have faith? And so I have a book right now that I have a book that's released already. It's called How to Kill God the Easy Way. But it's pretty fun. But it's a whole new. But I'm revising it currently. It's in the editing process with about 30 editors right now, just dealing with all the ins and outs. It's more expanded based upon all the feedback I've gotten throughout the last year that it's been out. And I'm changing the name of it as well. I haven't released the name yet publicly, but I will be releasing it very soon, just so it's easier to put in the hands of people, because that title seems to be off-putting for Christians. Who knew? I would have loved that title as a Christian, but that's just me. So anyway, so I'm revising it, but my intention in this book is to wake Christians up and help them see that they literally have no reason to believe in God, and they're basing their lives on a book of mythology from 2,000 years ago in an ancient tradition, teaching them how to live, and they're missing out on so much life. And they're basing their morality on this book that teaches things like slavery, murder, rape, pedophilia, like all these horrible things. And I don't think a lot of Christians are even aware that stuff's in the Bible, but they just call themselves Christians. And there's this new, just kind of like new atheists, there's these new Christians, there's this new sect going on now that I'm constantly encountering, that they don't care what the Bible teaches. They just kind of make it up as they go along. They want this God. They make up their Jesus that they think is wonderful. They pull verses here and there from the holy book of Christianity, and they're essentially just creating their own holy book, and they call it Christianity. And there's a major deception there. And one of the reasons I think they can't let go of the need to have God and Jesus is because it's been embedded in them through brainwashing for years and years that there is a desperate need to appease this God that's going to destroy you somehow if you don't find a solution to get to be with him forever. Otherwise, if there was no fear, why would we continue to try to propagate a historical Jesus and a God to try to have a relationship with that we're not even using the actual book to do, that teaches about it? So there's a lot of problems there I see that causes emotional distress, emotional tension, causes social problems. if you're living by faith, you literally get to make up whatever you want. And the danger of that is it's like putting a gun in the hand of a psychopath, or a sociopath or whatever. And the same thing's happening here. Putting faith in the hands of somebody is the same thing as saying, hey, when your God tells you whatever he wants to tell you, you get to do that because God's objective standard says what we should and shouldn't do. That's how the Jim Jones of the world come around, Hitlers, you name it, because God speaks to them and tells them something, and then they go by it. And that's living by faith is very dangerous, not just for you as an individual, but for me as an individual. I don't want you to be living by faith because that could hurt me long term. And it completely obliterates the need for discussing issues of morality, because you don't discuss them. You just dictate because God says so. But it ultimately comes down to what your God says, whatever you've invented. So it's really problematic. So I have a deep concern as an atheist to help Christians deconvert, to help them see, and not just Christians, but people of faith in general, to help them see the dangers of living by faith. And so I personally do attempt to do that because I think it's important. I think it could help society in the long run. But I also I don't want to be an asshole either, and treat them like they're worse than me. They're not. There's nothing wrong with them. They're not demented. They're not idiots. They're just brainwashed like I was. And I want to help them escape that. That's very important to me. Because especially as they're young, I don't want that. I lived 40 years under that, and I have much regret. I've missed out so much of my life because of that brainwashing. So yes, I have a deep desire to help people. So that's where I come from as an atheist. And I don't know if that's the kind of atheist you're comfortable with, or if you were pushing against that kind of atheist as well.
Now, the people I don't care to be numbered among are the scorched earth variety who obviously hate religion and are trying to debunk it, no matter how, like a bull in a china shop. They're just against any expression of religion. It has to be their way. They're a bunch of jerks. And the people that try apparently to live down to the believer stereotype of atheists. I hear every once in a while of the very questionable moral code, if you can call it that, of certain atheist leaders, and I think, yeah, what on earth? And it is as if there, what was it, Dostoevsky, one of these people said, if there's no God, then everything is allowed. Well, some of them seem to think that. I think you better have something else to fall back on. Like Aquinas said, even if you didn't know there was a God, you can look at natural law, just the kind of creatures we are as social animals, and you can have a social compact, and there are other obvious reasons that are not arbitrary to govern your behavior. And I'd like to see a bit more of that. And I don't think you need God for that, and neither did Aquinas, actually. He said there's a different reason for believing in God, but he says Aristotle knew nothing about the God of the Bible, and he didn't need to know what the good life was. No wonder they thought he was a heretic for so long. And with is there a God? I don't have any hesitation of saying, well, yeah, the God of the Bible is really just like Zeus or something. It's there's no, it's just the voice of the writers editorializing and claiming divine authority, and not necessarily to manipulate. Like you said, they probably do think God told him this and that, but that there could have been a creator, I'm in no position to know one way or the other, nor am I urgent to know it. So I don't consider myself an agnostic. Maybe somebody will come up with something, but it doesn't matter to me. It's not a live option, like William James said.
Right. And so I guess that's what I was trying to say. Atheism is not a statement that there is no God. It's a statement that says we have no reason to believe there is one.
Yes.
And so if you can persuade me of one and show me, then I'll believe in a God.
Right.
I'm not rejecting the possibility that God might exist. I'm rejecting the fact that you have no evidence that one does yet.
But
And currently, all we have evidence for is the natural realm, and that's all we can demonstrate. Until you have evidence to demonstrate otherwise, or a method by which we can test the supernatural, I have zero reason to believe in it, and so I'm not going to live my life based on that. And neither should you. We should live by the method of I don't know. Like that's a great way to live. I don't know. And if I don't know, then I'm not going to jump ship and just make the leap of God of the gaps. I'm going to live with what we do know, and that so far is the natural realm, and that's all we have. And so that's what I'm trying to get Christians to wake up to is just that simple fact. Like, you're believing something that you don't even know why you believe it. Like, there's no real grounds for it. You have no evidence for it. And it's better to stay in the I don't know realm rather than trying to make something up just because you don't like it.
Right. Yeah, I agree completely.
So that's where I'm at. So that being said, what do you think Christianity is evolving into, and what will replace it if and when it dies? Like, what ideology would replace it, or maybe another religion? Like, what do you foresee? Because something's gonna come about. We're gonna have like my mind. In my mind, I think, and this is a phrase I use in my book: as theism dies, humanism will rise. And I think that's a parallel thing. And I think humanists are going to fill the gap, but I think right now theism is overwhelming the attempts because it has so much money and power and even government support to continue to succeed and provide environments that are conducive to communities and things like that. But I think humanists very much want to take that over and do the same things. They just don't have the resources to pull it off. So I see humanism rising in that role, but I was curious what your thoughts were.
Well, that is entirely reasonable and plausible to me, and I hope that is what would happen. But I have a hunch that before that happens, the world could become enslaved to Islam because there's insufficient attempts to prevent it, and the incredible invasion of Western societies by Islamic law and Sharia and all that stuff, with people whose minds are so open they need to be closed for repairs. They seem to assume everybody is nice and rational and tolerant, but no, the jihadi types are a minority of Muslims, but there's so darn many Muslims, a minority is still pretty huge. And often even they will sympathize and support the jihad, though they may not partake of it personally. And I think it's not unlikely that they will overrun the world and things will be pretty grim. And then what's it going to take to unseat that? Because there'll be no hesitation to have Hindu-Muslim wars like India and Pakistan. And Christianity, again, if you're nonviolent and you think Charles Martel was a barbarian and he should have turned the other cheek, well, he only got so many cheeks to turn, and then it's Allahu Akbar. And so I'm afraid that may be the next regime, and what it would take to get rid of that, I don't know.
That's interesting. I know over at Atheist Nation, his name evades my mind. The guy who started that, he was a Muslim, and he wrote a book. He also he tried to commit suicide because he was so afraid, and survived. He jumped out of a window and survived. I wish I could remember his name right now, but it's just evading me. It's frustrating. I just read his book. Naveed something. Anyway, I apologize. It's slipping my mind. But anyway, it's excellent book. But he talks about escaping Islam as well, and so he's doing the same thing for Islam that I'm attempting to do for Christianity and many others as well. And I hope there's success there because it's the same principle. Now I heard somebody recently say to me that so in Hebrews 11:1, faith is the evidence of things unseen, the assurance of things hoped for. And so my chief argument in my book is that that's the grounds for Christianity in general. It's faith is the evidence, not faith plus evidence. Faith is the evidence. That's literally all you have. That's the argument of Scripture. You're supposed to base your entire life on God by faith. That's it. All these other attempts by apologists to try to prove God exists is completely futile and pointless. Your whole argument should just be faith. That's it. And that's always what it comes to anyway. Every time you debate an apologist, at the end of the day, it's, well, you just have to have faith. What do you mean I just have to have faith? What was the point of all your arguments?
Anyway. It makes you think they're insecure about having faith, so they're relying on works, cognitive works, arguments to prove it. They shouldn't be that concerned, but they are.
No, it's true, and they're very concerned about trying to provide evidence because I think they realize how foolish they look in light of the scientific community, and they're trying to have a voice in the scientific community, but you can't. If faith doesn't, there's no method in science that can test faith measures. Like, that just doesn't work. So that is your method, and as long as that's your only method, you really have no leg to stand on. But be that as it may, I've heard plenty of arguments. I think N.T. Wright argues like this, and the Auburn Avenue views argue, and somebody reminded me of it recently, that pistis is sometimes thought of to be faithfulness or loyalty versus the word faith. And I was like, well, that even makes the problem worse, because if faith alone is how you're living your life, you get to have God tell you whatever he tells you because it's just faith anyway, and you get to do what you want. But if now it's loyalty, now we have an even greater problem, because now you're loyal to this God and to do whatever it is he tells you, and nobody can tell you otherwise, because what he says goes. So when you think about the Islam religion and the dangers that brings about, it's like, whoa, I can't think of anybody more loyal. They're more loyal than Christians are, honestly, to their cause. So you make a good point, because if that's the way we're going to define faith, we're in trouble. I mean, that's very risky.
Yeah, that's the truth. I love what Walter Kaufman says in his book, The Faith of a Heretic. He says those people that say evidence will take you only so far, and you have to make the leap or the step of faith, seem to realize there's a whole lot of people making the same pitch. Ultimately, how are you going to decide which is right? It's finally just rolling the dice and hoping for the best. Because once you're in it and do have the faith, you've decided not to give ear to any other arguments. Like C.S. Lewis, in an incredible essay called on obstinacy in belief, I think it is, he says that, you got to use your best thinking to decide whether to become a Christian, but once you do, you have to pay no attention to any argument against it. Are you kidding? But at least he seemed to realize how to avert the danger, assuming anybody can do that. I mean, can you really lobotomize yourself that way? Most people, I think, don't have that problem because they've accepted in a sort of a childish, uncritical way. They don't confuse me with the facts. They're not on that level. They're interested in more practical matters and so forth. Like, well, I got to change over to the faith of the person I want to marry. Really? Is it like just changing a suit of clothes?
That's not the way it works, but yeah, it's fascinating. But yes, that is you made such a brilliant point there, and it's so true. Once you settle with your conclusion and you're definitively, I know, the whole I know that I know that I know that I know, that whole statement we said in Christianity. Once you've settled there, you're right. There's no room for study. You're not going to look elsewhere for an answer that's better. You just already concluded, and that's the danger of just not settling with I don't know. If you just jump to conclusions, you're never going to get there. So anyway, so one of the questions that I think a lot of both Christians and atheists that leave Christianity or religion in general, leave faith theism struggle with is the whole question: what is your meaning in life? What gives you meaning if not religion? And just hearing from somebody that has been through it and is living a life outside of religion, what would you say to that question to help people know?
Well, I think of something Hindus say, follow your dharma, or as Aristotle said, your entelechy, that everything has an inborn trajectory. The acorn must become an oak unless it's prevented somehow. You can cut it down and use the wood to make a deck for your porch or something, but if you allow it to take its course, it's not going to become something other than an oak. Well, your circumstances, your genetic inheritance, whatever, has made you the person you are. And probably something will come to the surface that attracts you. Gee, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be one of those. And then you follow that. I think of a passage in Jeremiah: before I formed you, I knew you, or which kind of means I chose you to become a prophet. Well, I've thought of that in connection with the fact that I have long felt I what I am here for, not that anybody predestined or programmed me, is to be the Bible geek. And to love certain things that appeal to and open up my imagination. And because of that, I see like an unbroken continuum between mythology, scripture, superheroes, science fiction and horror literature. It's all part of the same universe to me. And so I'm active in all of those things without any sense of contradiction. There's no way I can be an accountant like my brother. I'd almost rather shoot myself than be sentenced to that. But he gets some satisfaction out of it. He's wired differently than I am. And I can't go into athletics. Maybe I could have had I been interested in it as a kid, but I wasn't. And so I think you have a built-in purpose, and circumstances may thwart that, and you live a life of tragedy. But ideally, there probably is a dharma that you have, and so you are living that out. There is a script. Somebody may have assigned you one that you don't want, a role you don't want to play. Maybe you can get used to that. Maybe you can't, and you can reject it and find another one. Many people do, but I think it's an inborn tendency to create an identity and a role, and that is not arbitrary in my view. That brings satisfaction, and but to put it in a slightly different framework, like with Nietzsche, we make our own purpose and meaning. Meaning must be in the eye of the beholder, because where else could it be? Where else is there for it to be? And it can't simply be assigned to you. It'll never be authentic if that's the case. And only you can say what it is. And so is there a meaning to which you must correspond? No. Nietzsche says there is no central sun of meaning. The earth has become unchained from the sun and now wanders through the universe like on the corny old sci-fi show Space 1999, where Moonbase Alpha flies off into that's like Nietzsche. There you make it. It's you face a blank canvas. It's up to you to decide what you're going to paint. That's your life. And to me, that is the what he called the joyful knowledge. That's not nihilism. There's nothing of despair about that. That's the ultimate freedom and the only path to authenticity. It's not like there is a God-shaped hole that you have to try to fill. No, there is a U-shaped hole that you have to fill. So that's my philosophy.
I think that was awesome. I love that and I appreciate it. I've heard many times from people that they they really desire God to tell them what their life's going to be because somehow they think that's wonderful. And yet, the irony is, what person would want the government to dictate their job for the rest of their life? They would hate that. Nobody would want that. But for some reason, when it comes to God, we just shut off our freedom, our desire for freedom, and we just blindly say, "Oh yeah, because He's God and He knows best." How do you even know He knows best? What because he said so. Like, how do you even know that's what He actually said? Like, you're the one judging the character of God, and you're dictating that you think He's the best judge of your life. It's bizarre to me.
Well, in a chapel sermon at a college I used to teach at, I said, here you are in college, you're trying to settle on a career and all that. Oh, you're asking what's the will of God for your life. Well, don't you think there are clues about your all inclinations? Don't you think, if you're a theist, as they were, that God made you? What does it say in one of the Psalms? All the days of my life were inscribed in your book before the first one of them happened. That's a way of saying that if you believe in divine providence, it has made you what you are. So if you find repugnant the idea that, is God calling me to be a missionary to the penguins in Antarctica? Oh, I hope not. Of course not. What is it that do you have artistic or musical abilities that you enjoy developing? There you go. Is God giving you that and then say, now don't use them? Of course, that's absurd. There is an answer to Christians who are asking for the will of God. Look where you can find it. Hasn't He put it into you? And you can tell what it is by self-reflection. So it doesn't have to be a God, but if there is, that's still the answer.
Yeah, well, exactly. It turns out, wow, go figure, with or without a God, the answer's the same.
Yes.
That's awesome. So I have just 3 last fun questions for you, just to end this. But I want to give everybody who's watching a chance to start throwing in your questions now, if you have any for Dr. Price, so that we can go ahead and ask him. If you just want to make some comments, I see some fun comments coming through here, and I'll read some of those because some of them are really encouraging. And but before we do, so here's my first of the fun questions. So before the show, you and I had a chance to talk about our favorite superheroes, and yours is Superman and mine is Batman. I've always loved Batman just because he doesn't actually have any superpowers, but he's just badass, he's just, and I always just loved that, admired that in a superhero. But if Jesus was a superhero or a supervillain, whichever, which of the superheroes or supervillains that you have ever watched or listened to or studied or whatever would resemble Jesus the most?
The Silver Surfer. The way Stan Lee wrote him in those early issues of the Silver Surfer, he is completely Christ-like. He cannot understand the hatred that human beings have for him, where he's like a god literally out of heaven with the purest of motives. And he even fights Mephisto, who's obviously supposed to be the devil. But he stops short. It's when Mephisto makes a offer, well, if you serve me, I will let this captive go. No, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm drawing the line there. And the Silver Surfer, furthermore, is like Jack Kirby created him. And Kirby was a Jew with, I think, mystical leanings, because he admitted Galactus, who's going to be in the movie soon, he is God, according to Kirby. And the Silver Surfer was like his angel who would find planets for him to absorb. But then he turned against him once he sided with the poor people. It's just like the Marcionite god. And he sides with humanity rather than the tyrannical deity. And in his fourth world stuff, the new gods, he gets into the Kabbalah and so forth. But as to being a Christ analog, it's got to be the Silver Surfer.
Wow, you really thought through that more than I expected.
I did an essay called Comic Book Christs. I'll email you a copy of it where I say you can trace out and explain the history of Christology by drawing analogies to the various superheroes. I'll send it to you. I think you'd enjoy
That's
it.
fascinating. I appreciate that. That's great. All right, here's another fun one. Which gospel would make the best musical? I mean, you're a New Testament scholar. You got to have the answer to this.
I think probably the Gospel of John, because you could translate the discourses of Jesus. In fact, something like that was done in a kind of cheap evangelical ripoff of Superstar called Truth of Truths, which is kind of chintzy, but I've always liked it anyway. And there's Jesus singing, I am what I say I am. It's pretty neat. And that would be a perfect structure to make a musical from.
That's great. That is great. All right. Last question that I have, and then I don't really see any questions coming through, so I might just read a couple of comments and then we'll end the show. But last question that I have, and this is very important. You ready? If Bart Ehrman and William Lane Craig were both drowning, and you could only save one,
oh boy. I guess I'd flip a coin. I wouldn't want either one of them to come to any harm.
That's awesome. I love it. That's a good political answer. That's great. See, you are a great politician. Oh, that was all in jest, all in fun. I love that answer. That was really, really great. All right, so just running through these, just a couple things. Seeing if I see anything. My partner Ray said, she said, I completely agree with Robert. Why can't we be a gentleman? Why can't we be civil? Awesome. Totally agree as well. Deborah King says, I think I could listen to Robert Price all day. Indeed.
My poor wife has no choice.
That's great. Somebody was asking earlier, and then they had to leave. When was Jesus born? Matthew and Luke don't agree. So which gospel is correct? He was really trying to get that answer. I mean, it wasn't really directed at you, I don't think. But either way, I imagine your answer would be, well, neither one, because Jesus didn't exist. So I would imagine.
But even if he did, there's no answer, because the two do contradict seriously. And there were even people that thought Jesus was born in the 1st century BCE or the 2nd. So who the heck? Nobody even knew back then, or thought.
All right. Well, Toothless Bulldog 3.0. There you go. If you watch this back, sorry you had to leave tonight. There's the best answer that we will give tonight, or can give. Let's see. There is no historical account of Jesus. Venix agrees. And then I guess one last comment. Exactly, Mr. Price, and the culture of atheists that are so judgmental towards atheists that disagree with their moral compass and they're mean. And I think that was the point you were making. Why can't we all just get along, right? I think that's a good message to walk away with from this wonderful conversation. Regardless of disagreements, different views, different positions on things, we're all on a journey. We started like that. We'll end it like that. Let's just learn to be kind to one another. Let's learn to be compassionate, and definitely use common love with one another. Not that Christian love, that dictates how a person has to live, but the love that comes from genuine compassion for another person, and just genuinely seeing where they are in their life and doing what's best for each person in it. So, Dr. Price, thank you very much for being on this show tonight. I appreciate it.
Total pleasure. Thank you for having me.
It was an absolute blast. So we will see you on the flip side. Everybody, thank you for watching. Don't forget to check out the info below where you can get Bob's books and check out the different ways to support down there if you would like to see more shows like this. And come on over and join Deconversion Nation on Facebook. I'd love to have you over there. It would be a great time. We will see you all on the other side. Good night.